Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, our new YouTube show, which is kind of an outgrowth of our old YouTube show, Monday Night Live. This one is going to run during the off season. We'll do it every week during the run up to spring practice, which starts in March. We're going to do it every week during spring practice through the end of the blue gold game. I'm sure we'll do it draft weekend, which is the next weekend. So all the way through April. The difference between the two shows is it's not on Monday every week. In fact, it's rarely on Monday. Another thing we found out last week that you didn't see on the Monday Night Live show is occasionally I'll adjust my camera, apparently not realizing we're already live. So that's a feature hopefully we can get rid of.
At least you weren't picking your nose that
at
time.
At least I wasn't picking my nose. But, you know, we're going to do it kind of around the news flow, and there's a lot coming up. This Friday, we're going to talk to all 4 of the transfer players that are already on campus participating in winter workouts. The following Friday, we get to talk to all 12 early enrolled freshmen. Sometime during the month of February, we'll talk to all 10 assistant coaches. So there's a lot coming up. What's really important if you want to follow the show is to subscribe, and we're almost at the magic number of 1,000 subscribers. So if you are that 1,000th subscriber and I can figure out who it is, you're going to get some kind of prize. And then the other thing is to sign up for notifications, because we're not always on the same time or the same date. You can click the notification bell and they'll send you a notification letting you know when we're on. So again, lots of news, recruiting shenanigans every week. And as we did with the Monday Night Live show, we'll take your questions. We'll start working them into the conversation soon. So start filling up the question portal.
Yeah, and we won't get to them right away because we do have a first topic we have to get off first, and we'll try to get through the whole thing before we do that. And that's something we hinted at last week. That we didn't have time for in terms of ranking Notre Dame's top players going into the spring. So, but please submit questions. You can submit questions during that segment. We may not answer them to then. Also chime in who you think has the better list. I'm curious to see if you think one of us is smarter or one of us is dumber than the other one. Or
if we're both dumb.
Yeah, maybe we're both dumb. You can tell us we're both idiots. Just say it kindly, and we'll allow that. But if you are new to live shows on YouTube, you can comment when you're either in the app directly or on a desktop or on a mobile device. If you're on a mobile device, the comment section is below the video screen of us talking. And if you are on your desktop or the app, it should be on the right-hand side. So hopefully you can figure that out. If we can get Eric on a live show, I'm sure that we can get you to submit questions. So but feel free to notify us if something's going wrong, although you won't be able to do it via YouTube if this is your issue. But we can try to get you sorted out for future shows if that's something that you've been struggling to get your head wrapped around. So Eric, go ahead and tee us up for our first topic.
Okay, assessing Notre Dame's top 12 players going into spring. So the methodology here was it's not all about the snapshot at the end of the season. A lot of it's about projection. So you could put as much projection into the formula you want. I found as I went a little bit deeper into the top 12, I projected more. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think is important is 1 and 2 was pretty easy, and then it got to be a difficult exercise after that, where I actually did a story for our print content, and on our Insider Lounge message board, you know, other people would say, well, I would have included this, I would have included this person, I would have excluded this. And really, I don't have a lot of great arguments. That shows you really how difficult it is once you get to number 3. And the importance of that is how critical spring practice is going to be. When you have that many unknowns and that many players that you're counting on being ascending, boy, it's going to be really a critical spring practice. The other thing is it's going to show a lot about Marcus Freeman's player development model which is somewhat similar to BK's from the standpoint, Brian Kelly's from the standpoint, Matt Balis in the center of it. But there's also development going on the field. And I would imagine this list is going to look quite different at the end of spring. I did this last year, not for publication, but for Aaron Taylor, who wanted to know who I thought were the top players going in. And he got mad at me because I didn't have enough offensive linemen on the list. But I said, look, Harry hasn't coached them yet. And if you looked at the list in August and really looked at it at the end of the season, there would have been quite a few offensive linemen up on the list. And as we start this, I'll start with my number one player, Joe Alt, who is an offensive lineman. By Pro Football Focus standards, he was the best guard or tackle in the whole FBS. If you put a limit on snaps, there was a reserve, and I'll let Tyler tell you who the reserve was. There was a reserve player that had a higher score PFF grade than Joe Alton. Who was that, Tyler?
That would be the one and only Mark Heastan, Harry Heastan's son, who's playing at Air Force, who I think at the time had like 34 snaps or something in that neighborhood. So it was pretty funny. I was writing a feature on Joe Alt, and I was messing around with the numbers. And I said, would you believe that of all the people that are ahead of him, if you get rid of the snap counts, it's Harry Heastan's son. So clearly Harry Heastan knows what he's doing, and people are listening. Or Pro Football Focus is obviously a big fan of Harry Heastan's work as well, whether or not that was intentional or not. But I thought that was kind of funny. But Joe Alt's my number one pick as well. That was pretty easy. I don't know that I have much more to add than what you already said. So I'll jump to number two, and we have our number two is the same, and that's quarterback Sam Hartman. I just think that his impact is going to be that immense. Really is the story of the offseason. I think will be the story of the season, and has changed the outlook for Notre Dame's offense going into the season. I think certainly things need to wide receivers to continue to develop and take another step forward and be able to maximize Hartman's abilities. But it's just a really big addition, and I'm expecting big things from him, even though he has had a lot of highs, but he also had a lot of lows. I believe it was 5 players I counted across the FBS who had more lost turnovers than Sam Hartman last season. So he gave the ball away at times, but he certainly made teams pay plenty more.
If you look at and what I did was in the article that I wrote, I included what this list would like if you did it based on Pro Football Focus's grades at the end of last season. Mm-hmm. And I included the transfers. But again, PFF doesn't project into the next year. It's just based on last year.
Right.
Sam Hartman is the only one who made my list. But in the PFF, Caleb Smith and Javonte Jean-Baptiste also made the top 12 based on purely PFF scores. So it's interesting. But again, Sam Hartman, the only transfer. I may have some buyer's remorse on Caleb Smith. I'm not sure about Javonte Jean-Baptiste. He's going to have to convince me.
Yeah, Caleb Smith was in my sort of next 5 that didn't make my top 12. And I could have made an argument to include him on the list, but I didn't quite get there yet. Maybe once we get our eyes on him and see what he looks like with Sam Hartman, our opinions will change on that front. All right, our third picks are where we start to differ. Eric, go ahead and reveal who you had at number 3.
I have Blake Fisher, and some of that is projection, and some of that was how good he was at the end of the season. And again, this is a guy with great peaks and also some divots. And what's going to make him number 3 is getting rid of those divots, or certainly minimizing them. And that's kind of who I project him to be. So Aaron Taylor better be happy, former Notre Dame All-American who's been on our podcast a few times, because I have 2 offensive linemen in the top 3.
You're going to have to send him the link so he can enjoy that. So since you mentioned Fisher, I'll say I have him at number 5 on my list. And number 3 on my list was cornerback Benjamin Morrison. I just think that he had such a phenomenal freshman season, and I think he's just sort of starting to scratch the surface. To think of how well he was playing at the end of the season, with so little college football experience, I just think he's going to continue to grow and get better at that. I imagine that he's a pretty confident kid, but he's not like, he doesn't express that as much. I think we started to see that. We started to see that in the bowl game. I think he was dancing after he made the interception. That was not necessarily something that you would have associated with Benjamin Morrison going into that. So I think we're starting to see him come out of his shell a little bit, in addition to his game continue to expand. And I really like what he not just was last season for Notre Dame, but will continue to develop into. And I think will be a shutdown corner. I think teams are going to stop throwing his way as much as they did at the end of last season. And that's going to be a huge addition and impact to Notre Dame. Addition isn't the right word. It's going to be a huge factor in Notre Dame's defense and what it can decide to do based on knowing what it has at from Benjamin Morrison at the cornerback position.
Okay. For me, number 4 was Logan Diggs, and that was a tough differentiation between Logan and Audric Estime, because Audric had more rushing touchdowns. He had a few more yards than Logan. He also had a better rush average. So what's this based on? How he looks in the uniform? No, first of all, Logan was not himself for a couple of weeks. So he was behind on the yards. He had, I think 11 touches for 16 yards total in his first 2 games against Ohio State and Marshall when he was coming back from shoulder surgery. I think he's still the more well-rounded of the two. I think he's the better receiver. I also think he's the better blocker, and he's better at holding on to the ball, and that was critical when I was making these decisions. Audric Estime, off the top of your head, you're going to remember a couple of fumbles, one at the goal line against North Carolina that made that score seem a lot closer than it was. The other was in the Stanford game. Notre Dame had a chance to kind of escape there with an ugly win, and Audric puts it on the ground. They lose the fumble, and Notre Dame goes on to lose that game. So ball security for Audric will help him move up the list, although I think he's on his way.
Yeah, I had Logan Diggs slightly higher than Audric Estime on my list as well. I think the differentiator for me is maybe the big play ability that I think you can see from Logan Diggs, whereas Audric, he can break some big runs, but he just doesn't have the same kind of speed, and I don't think that he's going to like the pass play that we saw in the Gator Bowl. That was a really big moment for Notre Dame where the offense was needed to recover, and Logan Diggs takes a swing pass and scores a touchdown. Now maybe Audric Estime does the same thing, but I have a little bit more confidence in Logan Diggs' ability to do that. So that's why I have Logan Diggs higher on my list. But for my number 4, this is probably going to be my most controversial pick, and it is linebacker J.D. Bertrand at 4th overall. I just think that he means so much to Notre Dame's defense. He gets guys in the right places. He puts himself in the right place. He makes a lot of tackles. And just if Notre Dame's defense didn't have him, I'm not sure that it would operate at the same level. And I think he will continue to improve. I think even though maybe his tackle numbers didn't increase, I don't know that meant he was a worse player. I think he's continuing to expand upon his game, figure out where he needs to be, and his anticipation, I think, is one of his best assets. He just has a knack for knowing what the offense is going to do and can make some big plays here or there. And certainly he's not a guy that you expect to make a lot of plays in coverage, but he's pretty solid as a blitzer. That was, I think, something I saw this past season that I don't know that I anticipated him being good at, but he did that. So that's why I put J.D. Bertrand at number 4.
Okay, so I have Ben Morrison at number 5, and similar to the reasons that Tyler talked about, I think that the big thing that we'll get from Morrison in 2023 is a more physical player. Not that he lacked physicality, but he was 172 pounds. He didn't have Matt Balis for winter workouts in spring football. If you remember last year, he was a June enrollee.
Right.
So he was pretty thin. I think, he definitely has the frame to put on a little weight, become a little bit more physical. And that's going to help him both in coverage and run support. Not that he was lacking in either. I just think that you're going to start to see a player who could not just be a freshman All-American, who could turn into eventually just a regular old All-American, which Notre Dame hasn't had a lot of All-American cornerbacks in the last 10, 20 years.
And Benjamin will neither be regular or old, but he could be an All-American. We had Blake Fisher and Benjamin Morrison flipped on our list. I have Blake Fisher here at number 5. I think he can become a more dominant offensive lineman this upcoming season. It's critical to have both Alt and Fisher sort of anchoring the offensive line at the tackle positions, and he gained a lot of experience last season. He wasn't consistently dominant throughout the season, but I think he sort of developed and got better with that throughout the year. And just another off season working with Harry Heastan, I expect him to be even sharper in his fundamentals and continue to round into a really, really good right tackle for Notre Dame's offense.
So number 6 for me, Tyler's already counted him down. I have J.D. Bertrand at number 6, and I would imagine if you took a survey of the fan base and averaged it out, he would not make the top 12. And my reasoning for him being included in the top 6 or top 12 at all, beyond what Tyler said, was he knows his limitations, and I think he has fewer limitations than people think he has. As a weak side linebacker, last year, I think it was easier to maybe get him into some bad matchups in the pass game. It's harder to do that with him playing middle linebacker. And for now, he's been the leading tackler 2 years in a row for Notre Dame, and far and away the leading tackler. If he goes ahead and leads them again a third year, there is a very small list of players who have done that since Notre Dame started archiving tackle leaders in 1956. So there's 3 people. There's Bob Olson in the 60s. There's Bob Crable, a unanimous All-American, and then there's Manti Te'o. So I'm not saying that he's the caliber of those players, but I think being able to put that stat together helps you understand how valuable he is to the Notre Dame defense.
All right. And so the other flip-flop we had in our top 6 was I have Logan Diggs at 6 and Bertrand at 4. So we were flip-flopped on those. So like I mentioned earlier, Logan Diggs is big playability. He's an impact player in the backfield. I will reveal my number 7 here, being Audric Estime. They're that close to me that I felt like I couldn't put anyone between them. That I think they're both relatively as important to the offense, and the ability to have both of them in the backfield is really valuable for Notre Dame, and is going to really take some pressure off of Sam Hartman. I don't know that Sam Hartman was able to establish a talented or establish a running game in the same kind of way that Notre Dame should be able to around him, which is kind of funny considering Wake Forest had Kenneth Walker once upon a time, but it didn't work out for him at Wake Forest the way it did at Michigan State and now in the NFL with the Seattle Seahawks. But I think both those running backs are crucial to Notre Dame's offense, so that's why I needed Logan Diggs at 6 and Audric Estime at 7.
And I also have Audric Estime at 7. I'm curious what his numbers are going to look like this year, because you're going to have more players trying to push into the rotation. You're going to, I mean, we didn't even see Jabron Payne last year really in the backfield, but he's going to be trying to push in. Jadarian Price, if he's healthy and he looks like he did before he got hurt, you can't have him on the sidelines. And then Jeremiah Love is a special freshman. Now, again, he won't be on campus to June, so he wouldn't have qualified for this list anyways and wouldn't have made the list. But that's a big time running back. But I think Audric is going to make enough strides. And I also wonder if Chris Tyree's role is going to change a little bit, where he's more of a receiver this year. And that would also afford Audric and Logan Diggs the chance to maybe one or both of them become a 1,000-yard back.
Yeah, it's kind of Obviously, I think we did it right because we both have him in the same spot. But it's kind of wild that someone who averaged 5.9 yards per carry last season is who we have at number 7 on this list. I think that sort of speaks to not just what the offense can become, but sort of the talent that this team does have and the guys that can make such big impacts on it going into next season.
So when we get to 8 on my list, this is where the projections start to come in, and where if you were in a court of law, you wouldn't have enough evidence to support this. So it's more of a hunch, more of a glimpses. And I went with Tyler Buckner at number 8. Had Sam Hartman not shown up, I think Tyler Buckner would have been a top 10 caliber player on this team. I still think he is with Sam Hartman. I think if Tyler Buckner stays, he's going to be better for it. He's going to be a better leader. He's going to learn a lot of Sam Hartman's tricks. They're similar size and they have similar skill sets. And so I think this is going to be really good for Tyler Buckner. But I saw enough of him out of the Gator Bowl game. And again, South Carolina's defense, especially with some pieces gone, certainly as good as Ohio State's. And in some ways statistically wasn't as good as Marshall's. Marshall had a top 10 defense in all kinds of categories last year. So Tyler Buckner playing well in the South Carolina game gave me the chutzpah to put him in the top 10.
Yeah, this is where our lists start to differ pretty well. I mean, not significantly because we're just talking about 5 spots here at the back end, but I didn't include Tyler Buckner in my top 12. He would have been in my next 5 after that. My number 8 is Howard Cross III, Notre Dame's nose tackle. I think that he didn't play his best last season due to an ankle injury that was nagging him throughout the season, and that is important for anyone. But I think when you're someone like Howard Cross who gets so much out of his size because he is undersized, that I think even the smallest thing like that makes such a big difference because he needs to sort of be maximizing his potential and his strength on every rep because it isn't necessarily the same as going up against a 320 pounder. He doesn't have the size or the weight that some guys that play the same position as he does. So, but I do think he played well when he was healthy, and I think that he will be crucial going into this season in terms of setting the tone for the interior of the defensive line. Notre Dame is missing important pieces from its defensive line from last year when you lose Isaiah Foskey, Jason Adamalola, and Justin Adamalola. So I'm expecting Howard Cross to have a big season to really elevate his game and continue to maybe prove some of the doubters wrong that I've always questioned why he's playing at nose tackle with him being a bit undersized.
Right. I had a little bit of buyer's remorse about Howard Cross. He was number 6 on PFF's list if you do it purely on statistics from last year and play last year, grades last year. So I could see that, but I'm projecting some people to hop over him. So my number 9 player was another big projection. If you look at his Pro Football Focus grade for the whole season, it was so-so. But when you look at how well he played in the second half of the season, especially when Brandon Joseph was hurt, Xavier Watts makes my top 12. He's at number 9. I think he could even end up higher on this list. I think he's such an ascending player right now. Now he's got to be better in coverage, but in terms of, he certainly got better toward the end of the year. He's outstanding in run support. His run fits are really good. I just really like where he's going, considering how little safety he's played in college, and the fact that in training camp, when they were short of wide receivers initially, he was taking reps at 2 different positions on 2 different sides of the ball. So Xavier Watts is my football crush for the spring.
Yeah, and those 2 guys are why I felt like our list started to differ pretty greatly, because I didn't include him on my list either. I get that projection. I wasn't I'm not quite convinced that he will get to that point yet. I think I want to see a little bit more. I'm kind of curious if maybe some of the mistakes or coverage losses that we see that, well, maybe it was Xavier Watts' guy when we thought the cornerback was the problem. I want to see more and get a better sense for how he was handling all of his responsibilities. I think he is the most well-rounded safety that Notre Dame has. I think that puts him in a position to be the most valuable safety for Notre Dame, but I wasn't quite convinced to put him there. I went with Jack Kaiser at number 9, and that may be a little bit of a controversial pick as well. I think, especially for someone who played like half the snaps of another linebacker, Maris Leofau, this past season, I think Notre Dame needs to figure out how to get Jack Kaiser on the field more and utilize him better, because he was extremely productive when he was out there. And I think that he can bring too much value to the defense for him to be limited as much as he was last season. So maybe I'm bucking against what happened last year and trying to give Jack Kaiser some respect that maybe he didn't necessarily get. So I included him at number 9.
Jack Kaiser is the guy that I had the biggest buyer's remorse and not including in my top 12. And the reason being is statistically and from a, film grading standpoint, he grades out as one of Notre Dame's best players. He doesn't miss tackles. He's extremely productive for how few snaps he gets. And yet, and he probably wasn't playing his ideal position. Rover probably isn't his best position. Weak side linebacker is he can play middle linebacker. He did some when J.D. Bertrand had those 2 targeting penalties. Jack was helping fill a lot of different roles. My question is, it's kind of like the guy that's a pinch hitter in baseball or the 4th outfielder. Once they're getting regular reps and getting regular snaps, do those metrics hold up? That's what I'm not sure about. But I think this spring he deserves a chance to find that out. He's definitely not the prototypical Rover, because you need to take him off the field in 3rd down. There's some bad matchups in the passing game with him. And I think Jack would be the first one to admit that. But he's a fascinating player. I just don't know that Notre Dame's getting the most out of him. I remember asking Al Golden about Jack Kaiser snaps, and he had some injury issues, but this was when he wasn't injured. And his answer was, oh, yeah, I need to get him in more. So I really didn't get the answer of why he wasn't. But I got the promise that he would play more, and I don't know that it came to pass. I think he recognizes Jack's ability, but there came a point where, and it's going to come this spring, whether Maris Leofau has that high ceiling that a lot of us thought he had, or if Jack Kaiser is the better option there. And you got Prince Colley in there, so it's really going to be very competitive.
All right, who is your number 10, Eric?
I went with Riley Mills, and Riley was, to me, disappointing from a production and consistency standpoint. That's not on him. That's maybe on my expectations of him last year being a breakout player. I thought for sure that he would. He started the season as the starting field end and then was kind of going back and forth between that and defensive tackle. I think he is better served to play one position unless it's, I think he's better served just to be inside. I'll just say that. And I think focusing on that, I'm counting on Riley kind of having a bounce back year in my mind. I don't know that he will consider it a bounce back year, but I also think it's one of the things that you got to look at is coaching. If Coach Washington is getting the most out of these guys, and if we see a big surge in Riley Mills, then Coach Washington is going to get some credit for that. But I just think he's got a lot of raw ability, and he's going to be a senior. So he's running out of time to kind of turn into. I know a lot of people when he came on campus felt like he had a similar skill set to Jerry Tillery. So we'll see if that happens.
All right. I I have Riley lower on my list. I have him at number 12. I am in the same boat as you that it's actually basically 2 years in a row that I expected him to have a bigger role than he ended up having. And maybe role isn't the right way to impact the team more than he did. So I think after this season, I'm sort of in agreement with you that, okay, just move him to defensive tackle and let him play defensive tackle. I think we were sort of pitched the idea that Riley Mills' versatility and him playing multiple positions was like a feature of him. And it seems to have become a bit of a bug. Like it's like, well, okay, but if he's playing both spots, are you getting the most out of him? Is he becoming the best version of himself? And so I'm hopeful that that's what that becomes. Now, certainly you can still move him around situationally and find different ways to use him, but I think he'd be best served, and Notre Dame would be best served if he plays defensive tackle, because that is a hole that Notre Dame needs to fill as well.
I think the only way that doesn't happen would be post-spring. If Notre Dame got through the spring and they found a starting defensive tackle in the portal, the second portal market, the May 1st through 15th portal market, and said, wow, we could get this guy, plug him in. And let's say Javonte Jean-Baptiste ends up rotating at Viper with Jordan Botello rather than starting at the other end spot, and you don't have a natural starter there, possibly Miles or Mills would move back out to the field end. I still don't like that scenario, but I'm just saying to be aware that that is something that could happen.
Yeah, and so my number 10 was cornerback Cam Hart. He was probably the player I was the most surprised that wasn't on your list. Now, obviously, I put him at 10, so it's not like I expected him to be very high on your list, but I thought he would squeak in there towards the back end. So I put him on my list. I think he wasn't playing as himself last season. I think he was dealing with some shoulder issues before he actually dealt with the shoulder issue that took him out for the rest of the season. And hopefully now, certainly he's had shoulder issues before, so maybe that's a recurring issue and that limits him once again moving forward. But I think if Cam Hart can get back to playing the 2021 version of himself, that he's absolutely a top 10 player on Notre Dame's team going into next season.
I think if Cam Hart plays the way that I thought he would have last year, if he was healthy, he would have been 8 on my list. Okay. I need to see him be healthy, and then I can put him on it. So I'll have a different list in August. And if I see him being healthy and playing at that point, he just didn't, to me, never looked himself this year. But we had Mike Renner on our podcast from Pro Football Focus, and Mike felt like had Cam Hart come out, Cam would have been at the combine because of his size and some of his traits and so forth, even given kind of a so-so year on film. But he needs to get himself healthy, and then I think Cam Hart could certainly be included in this list.
All right, what's number 11 for you?
Well, I think when you look at both of our lists, I think it's daunting maybe to the fan that the first wide receiver that shows up on either list is Jaden Thomas at 11. Now, to me, a lot of these guys are very close. I mean, if you went at a top 18, I think you would start to see Jaden Thomas, Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey. I mean, Deion made the PFF list, top 12. But there's tons of projection going on there. Jaden Greathouse, Caleb Smith. Caleb Smith, the more I look at his highlights from Virginia Tech and look how bad their offense was around him, I think maybe I'm missing the boat on him. He may be Notre Dame's best receiver. I think right now it's Jaden Thomas. And some of that is I'm basing it on the Gator Bowl when there was not a Michael Mayer there, and we could kind of see what Notre Dame's offense was going to look like without Michael Mayer.
Yeah, I didn't include Thomas on my list, but he was the first one off. I had him actually when I originally made the list. You had described it as returnee, so I had considered Sam Hartman as a possibility. Yeah. So he was number 12, and then so he got the boot when I put Sam Hartman on the list. And then you talked about like the fact that we don't have wide receivers high on our list. So I did the next 5. I've sort of mentioned it a couple times now. My next 5 included 3 receivers. It was Jaden Thomas, Caleb Smith, and Lorenzo Styles. Thomas being the highest of them, and then I had Watson, Buckner before Smith and Styles. I think they're all sort of bunched in there, and I don't feel strongly enough to have one like way above the other. I agree with you that Thomas right now is the number 1, and that's changed relatively late in the season. I didn't necessarily feel that way, but until the last couple of games, and seeing how he continued to excel, and I think seeing how he was used without Michael Mayer in the offense in the bowl game, I think was valuable to get a better sense of what Jaden Thomas can become. So I understand your inclusion of him on the list. My number 11 was tight end Mitchell Evans, and that is another thing that the Gator Bowl helped convince me to be able to put him on this list. I mean, he hadn't caught a pass until that game last season, so it was like, we think he's good at this, but he never gets a chance to do it. So I expect him to make a big step forward in terms of as a passing game piece for Notre Dame. I mean, based on my list, I put him as the number 1 passing game piece. I don't anticipate him being like a similar player to Michael Mayer or being featured in the offense in the same type of way. But I think Notre Dame should have a lot of confidence in his ability to step up as the number 1 tight end and contribute to the offense both in the passing game and as a run blocker.
Right. We're getting down to the end of the list here. So if you've got some recruiting questions specifically and any other questions, start filling up the question portal, because we're going to be wrapping this up and we can work your questions, and especially if you've got recruiting conversation questions. So number 12 for me was Mitchell Evans, based on everything Tyler James just said, so I won't repeat him.
And then, like I mentioned earlier, Riley Mills was my number 12. So it was interesting that we both had the same top 7, but we had different orders. So the top 7 players, in our opinion, in various order: Joe Alt, Sam Hartman, Blake Fisher, Logan Diggs, Benjamin Morrison, J.D. Bertrand, and Audric Estime. You were a lot higher on Xavier Watts and Tyler Buckner than I was. I'm a lot higher on Howard Cross, Jack Kaiser, and Cam Hart. And so this is an interesting exercise to see not only how I think the roster, or what sort of shape the roster is in going into the spring, but also getting a better idea of like where we differ and what we think of the roster going into this spring. And I think it'll be another important spring for Notre Dame, and it can take its time getting here. I'm not ready to start getting up early for spring practices when it's freezing cold in the morning. But I am looking forward to getting those opportunities when it slowly gets here in March.
I also came up in the original piece that I did. I came up with 5 ascending players, and I'm talking about 5 players I think that are dramatically going to change and expand their roles in the spring. And we'll see if that actually happens. And this is not in a particular order, but I have Tobias Merriweather, wide receiver, a linebacker, Jalen Sneed, who plays rover, freshman right now. He'll be a sophomore in the spring. Billy Schrouth, offensive guard. I think he's going to end up being a starter. Jordan Botello, senior Viper end, and freshman cornerback, soon to be a sophomore, Jaden Mickey. You know, Mickey had a really good spring last year, had a good summer, didn't have a great season, but learned a lot. And I think he's going to be able to apply those lessons and be a good partner in crime for Ben Morrison.
Yeah, so you had pitched this idea to us to me last week, and so I had come up with my list before it, having seen your list, and like I mentioned, we had the same top 7, although in different orders, and I had 4 of the 5 same ascending players as you do. I have Merriweather, Billy Schrouth, Jordan Botello, Jaden Mickey. The one difference I have is Prince Colley, which we're both talking about a linebacker, but we both picked different linebackers, with you going with Jalen Sneed and me picking Prince Colley. So
I think he is too. I just don't know where he fits.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to mean somebody, one of either Kaiser or Leofau or both get pushed down the depth chart or get pushed to another position, I don't think Colley plays the rover.
Right.
But I think he's really talented. He was Notre Dame's, wasn't he one of the special teams players of the year that Brian Mason?
I think he might have been the special.
Yeah.
I think like for the team when they did the awards night
Yeah.
or whatever that we no longer get access to. I think he won special teams player of the year for his impact on multiple special teams and particularly on the punt return team / punt block team, as that was just as important this year. But yeah, I get that, and I feel the same way. I think that's why I guess I don't know that I would say it with a ton of certainty. I don't know what the role looks like. I'm discounting Maris Leofau. Now maybe that's unwise, but I just wasn't in love with what he did this year. And I have some sort of like prediction or hope that maybe he becomes some sort of pass rusher that they use rather than a more traditional linebacker, and then that sort of clears the path for someone like Prince Colley. And I didn't put Sneed. I think he is. I can see him playing the role that he played in the bowl game, where he comes in as a pass rusher occasionally, but I'm not convinced that he's ready to be the rover yet. So that's why I didn't necessarily put him as one of my ascending players. So although I wouldn't be surprised, like it wouldn't be crazy with someone that has that much talent. I'm not sure because becoming the rover and being a rover that's able to play, like you got to be able to do more than rush the passer. You got to be the rover position. I think is just as it might be the hardest position on Notre Dame's defense if you're making the most out of it. So I think there's just such a big learning curve there that I wasn't necessarily ready to make the leap for Jalen Sneed yet. And I know you have been. I mean, you've been sort of pounding that table throughout the back half of the season. And I think a lot of Notre Dame fans will be excited if that becomes true.
They'll be pounding with me. He's a very interesting situation in that he played so many positions that have nothing to do with what he's doing now in high school, why he got such a high rating and why his high school coach BJ Payne at Hilton Head Island High School is so bullish on him is because of what he was able to do in camps and combines. So he did cover slot receivers, he did cover tight ends and those. It's something that he's worked a lot on outside of what Hilton Head Island High School was asking him to do. And I think he's extremely intelligent. Not playing didn't affect him at all. His confidence, he was I just think he's ready. And again, I may be a little off on my timing, but I think eventually we're going to be having this conversation. I remember when the spring, I want to say before Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's junior year, they brought him into the interviews at the Blue Gold game. It was the first time we ever interviewed him. I had interviewed him in high school before he showed up on campus, but I hadn't interviewed him while he had been in Notre Dame. And they brought him in, and I go, wow, this dude looks the part. And sure enough, and as soon as he had not been healthy during his sophomore year, he missed it because of injury. Boy, he was ready. And I think at some point I'm going to have that same thought about Jalen Sneed, who was 198 pounds when he showed up as a 17-year-old last winter.
All right. I was flashing our banner here to send questions. We haven't received any questions, so I don't know if that means we're doing a spectacular show and no one has any questions, or everyone fell asleep on us. But
we didn't fall asleep, which is why it's called Football Never Sleeps.
Football never sleeps. That's right. So if you have some questions you want to submit in the next 15 minutes, we will certainly address those. We're going to start talking a little bit about some recruiting here, but here's a question from Jay Golden 44. You ask and you shall receive. Does Jaden Greathouse battle for punt returner? Will he see action sooner than Tobias Merriweather?
I asked him a little bit about the return game. They hadn't talked to him a lot about that. I think with Brandon Joseph not in the mix, you're going to see kind of an open competition, and certainly Matt Salerno will be in that competition, which is not going to
You
make
just got people throwing tomatoes at their screen.
Yeah, which is not going to make people happy. But they'll also look at some of the younger guys, and I'm not sure that Jaden Greathouse is going to win that battle. He didn't seem like he seemed willing to do it, but it didn't sound like it was something that they were prioritizing with him. Is he going to play more than Tobias? I don't think so. I think Tobias is going to be a starter. I think he has that potential to be a starter. When you talk to his teammates, that's who they think is the next star.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Jaden Greathouse out of the freshmen has the most chance to play.
Yeah, I don't see Greathouse as a returner type in college. He's more of a big-bodied receiver, and I don't know that he's going to be like someone that you'd expect to break loose on punt returns. Lorenzo Styles is someone I'd love to see back there. Maybe Chris Tyree can return some punts. He hasn't been used for that. He's been kept on kick returns, but they do have some shiftier guys that I think they'll probably give more chances as a punt returner. Maybe Jaden Mickey gets a look back there. I know he was a guy that did it in high school and was given some opportunities in practice last year. But yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Like they're not similar players in my mind. Like Tobias is someone that takes the top off of defense, as we saw with his one catch last season. Whereas I think Jaden's more of a possession type receiver. Not that Tobias can't be a possession receiver too, but I don't know that. I don't think that their skill sets will prevent one or the other from playing more. Now, obviously, that'd be more dictated based on the type of players against it. The Greathouse thing is like, I guess he's more Jaden Thomas-ish, I think. And so maybe that prevents him from playing. But we've talked about this before. I expect there to be a lot of more rotation in the wide receiver room because the talent has sort of risen to a level where they all can sort of play and then they're not being a big drop off. So I think that's what we'll see this season. All right, let's keep it going with another question from Southside Irish. What effect does the media room have on a Notre Dame football performance on Saturdays, positive or negative? And there was a follow-up to that. In other words, do the beat reporters have an institutional knowledge and insight to the game that can help the coaches?
Oh boy, do we think we do. We certainly write as if we do. I don't think that I think Marcus doesn't have his antenna up high enough that he is getting what our suggestions are. I don't think that he would. I think BK's, Brian Kelly's was at times, but he would never admit that he got an idea from us. I don't think it helps or hurts the team either way. I think it's how the coach processes the media. I think you can overplay the us versus them. Really, Marcus has never done that. Brian, maybe in 2011, did that a little bit. And it just doesn't, it's not something that you can kind of sustain. So as much as I'd like to say, yes, that would be helpful, I don't think it does. They certainly, like Al Golden knew what media and fans thought because we would bring it to his attention. JD Bertrand being one of those situations, but I wish it was. And then we could get royalties on our ideas.
What if like you suggested something and it works, you get they got to throw some money our way?
That's right, NIL money. I gotta say this.
Go ahead.
I was watching the Polynesian Bowl, and early in the game, Nico Iamaleava, I just butchered that, but the kid that's going to Tennessee from the West Coast throws a pick. Brandon Hillman's team picked it off. It wasn't Brandon Hillman. It was one of the cornerbacks on his team. And so they go immediately to the sideline to interview the kid. What was his reaction to picking off Nico? "We getting paid," was his quote. So football has changed a lot, and maybe it's going to change in the press box too. We getting paid.
I hope not. I do not want to, because if we're getting money for good ideas, that means that we owe them for bad ideas.
That's true. We have a lot of bad ideas.
We got a lot of bad ideas. I don't know that we impact much at all. I would, if there is an impact, I think we can see it maybe more with players. I do think players are aware of what is being said or written about them, and that can get in
Drew
their
Pine
head,
was.
get in their head a little bit more. I think some coaches are more aware than others and may have their antenna up more and aware of those things. I don't know that it impacts what they do. Now, I mean, I rarely, I don't know that I've ever had a coach say, that's a good idea. We're going to try that on Saturday. And if they did say that, they're probably being sarcastic.
Yeah.
So I do think there are times where I think you ask a coach a question and it's like they're ready for that and they want to be defiant, like they feel like the opposite of the question that you're posing, or maybe the thought that is behind the question that you're posing, and so they'll use that moment to do that. But I don't know that impacts what they're doing on Saturdays, because I mean they have to win. I mean, that's what their priority is. I mean, whether we like it or not, or we approve of what they're doing, winning the game it comes before that. I certainly they may have some times where they like, there might be a play that works that maybe we would have criticized, or a player would make a big play that they might say, hey, take that or whatever, like look to the press box. But I don't know that it's impacting. Take for example, the Virginia Tech game, when Ian Book, it wasn't a good game, but he led a comeback at the very end, and he was shushing the crowd. And I think the media was part of the people he was shushing too. He was aware of the criticism of him and the team that season, and he felt the need to express it after scoring the go-ahead touchdown in that game. So I think, but the impact that we play on like the actual outcome is very minimal, and I prefer it that way. If I wanted to make an impact on a game, I'd try it. I'd be a coach or get into that and have actual stakes. We don't have stakes as media members, so I don't think it's fair for us to have an impact on it either.
Nor do we have stakes in the press box.
No, if only.
Okay, so let's move along to our recruiting reset, and we'll kind of the theme of it is what is a dead period, what happens during it. So the dead period starts now, and it's going to be
at the very second that you said it. That's when it started.
Exactly. And it runs throughout February, so it's not exactly dead. You can't host recruits, you can't go visit them during the dead period. You can have contact with them via phone call,
right,
and things of that nature, but there's not a lot that's going on. Now, players can commit during a dead period. It's just not face-to-face contact.
Yeah, I like to describe it as the travel is dead, but communication is not. Like that, there's still plenty of communication that's happening, but there's just coaches aren't going out on the road and recruits aren't coming for visits.
So there was a visit weekend this weekend on Sunday before the dead period started, and there was a lot of conjecture about all who would show up. Ends up that cornerback Leonard Moore visited. He's from Texas, I believe. We have a future cast projection for Notre Dame to get his verbal commitment. So obviously he wasn't scared by the ice and snow up here. In fact, I think there's ice and snow in Texas right now. But what can you tell us about Leonard Moore, and what do you think about if Notre Dame ends up with him? Tyler?
Yeah, he's a 3-star recruit right now. Nick Harris is our national recruiting analyst who's located in Texas, and he's the one who put the future cast projection in. And when he brought that to the Insider Lounge, he also said, hey, also we're expecting Leonard Moore to get a rankings bump as well. So that would be good news for Notre Dame if they can get him in the class. Notre Dame already has a cornerback commit in Carson Hobbs. And I think based on what Benjamin Morrison was, it's like, well, if Mike Mickens likes him, I think I like him. Now, certainly, maybe if you take into account Notre Dame's sophomore class, which hasn't been as successful at the cornerback position, it's like, well, maybe they're reaching here too early. But I'm curious to, like, he doesn't have an offer from Texas or Texas A&M yet. Would that change things if those came later in the process? That would be my only hold up. His father is actually a professor at Texas. Now, I don't know if that helps or hurt Texas. Maybe he wants to get away. I don't know Leonard well enough personally yet to be able to say that. But it sounds like Notre Dame has done a good job with him and in his recruitment and impressed him while he was on campus this past weekend. So someone to keep an eye on moving forward.
So I guess the bigger news was who didn't visit. Justin Scott didn't make it over. This was a couple weekends in a row that he initially was supposed to visit.
Yep.
He's the 5-star defensive tackle from Chicago St. Ignatius High School. He is number 11 on Rivals top 250 for 2024. So he's very highly coveted. He was actually supposed to initially make his commitment today, which is his 17th birthday. He has put that off indefinitely. So what does it mean that Justin Scott didn't visit Sunday in terms of where Notre Dame stands?
It means the last 2 weeks didn't go as planned. Clearly Notre Dame had this vision of what would happen. And at first it was visiting last weekend and then him committing on the 31st. And then he decided to change the plan to visit this weekend. And then he was like, well, then he'd still commit. And then that didn't happen. So, it's not like a major blow in my opinion that he didn't make it here. Once the decision was made to put off his commitment and the decision was made to visit some other schools, this wasn't going to be like the last visit before he decided. So I think it's important. It would have been great to have him on campus. I don't think we should minimize that. The more times you get a kid on campus, the better. There's no downside to that, but it became less important for him to visit in January if he's going to visit other places in the spring. So Notre Dame needs to sort of get on a better same page with him. It was just sort of a bit bizarre how it all played out and seemed a little bit messy and confusing. So that's not a great sign that you're not on the same page with the kid, or the kid's not on the same page with you, or you don't have a great read on the situation. But it's not something that's irreparable. I think that things can get fixed here. Weather did play a factor. There was snow. Being from the area, I don't know that either day was snowy enough that would have prevented me from trying to get to a college that I really liked, but that was not the decision that Justin Scott made. So Notre Dame will have to keep fighting there, and he's worth fighting for. So you take the minor annoyance of the last 2 weeks with you and just keep pushing forward and keep making it clear to him how much you want him and try to take advantage of any opportunity you get to impress him.
Right. Had he come, CJ Carr would have shown up, and some of the other kids that were within driving distance in the Midwest would have been there. I actually had an interview with CJ Carr the night before, and it was kind of early in the evening, and he didn't know whether he was coming or not based on Justin Scott's
he was still waiting.
I think the best case scenario for Notre Dame is just to keep pushing and for Justin Scott to take some more visits. I think he's clearly conflicted. I think Georgia probably is the biggest conflict. And before you jump in and say NIL money, Georgia wouldn't need NIL money to convince anybody to take a visit there if they're a defensive lineman, kind of based on what their track record is with defensive linemen. I mean, that's Notre Dame is tight end U, Georgia is defensive line U. So that's one of the reasons they are two-time defending national champions now. We had a recruit that was seriously considering Notre Dame and then considered his home state, Florida, stronger. And he was, I think, probably always a little bit of a Florida lean. Adarius Hayes committing to Florida. How big of a loss is that for Notre Dame, or a big blow is that, do you think?
I mean, he's a very talented player for sure, a highly ranked 4-star recruit. But sort of like you meant, I think this was sort of how it looked like he was trending. I think Notre Dame liked what it did and the vibe it got from Hayes when he visited earlier this month, but then he was at Florida the last 2 weekends. And coming out of last weekend, he had told our Florida site, First and 10 Florida, that Florida was his leader. So that wasn't a good sign for Notre Dame. But then he gave an interview with our Kyle Kelly, our recruiting reporter, and made it seem like he had all these plans for more visits and a decision way down the line. And then he went ahead and made his commitment decision this past weekend. So Notre Dame was recruiting him more as a linebacker than a defensive end. I think actually defensive end's probably his better position long-term. And maybe that's where he would have ended up playing in the long term, but I think he wants to play linebacker, and so is being recruited that way. And we'll see what becomes of him in his college career in terms of his future position. But Notre Dame has a lot of different linebacker and defensive end targets out there. So they're not running out of options quite yet. So it's not worth being too upset about. And you lose a kid from Florida to Florida, that's going to happen from time to time.
Usually there's not bold headlines when a graduate assistant coach leaves Notre Dame. That's kind of what graduate assistants, that happens in their careers. They move on and so forth. But James Laurinaitis, the former Ohio State All-American, is probably in a little bit different category. He's more involved with the everyday coaching. He's also very involved in the recruiting aspect of it. He's going back to his alma mater, Ohio State, to advance his career there. This was his first year in coaching after a very successful NFL career. So, Tyler, what do you think? How do you think this plays out in terms of recruiting? First of all, is this going to hurt with some current 2024 kids? Secondly, does Notre Dame need to find somebody like James Laurinaitis to be a force in recruiting and everyday linebacker coaching?
I would say no. I think that's what you're paying Al Golden to do. That would be my perspective.
Right.
Now, I'm not the one that's writing the checks or assigning responsibilities, but I think that should fall within the purview of the defensive coordinator. And I actually did an evaluation of Notre Dame's coaching staff, assistant coaching staff over the past year, and ranked the coaches 1 to 10. And it had Golden fairly low on the list. And I think it was more because of the lack of impact it felt like he's been making on the recruiting trail than it was some of the defensive struggles that happened at times this season. So I think it does impact Notre Dame recruiting. I think any linebacker you would talk to that's being recruited by Notre Dame would name James Laurinaitis probably before they would name Al Golden. And that's okay if that was the role that they had that set up to be. But if he's not here anymore, Al Golden needs to fill that void, or someone else needs to fill that void. I spoke to Kingston Viliamu Asa from St. John Bosco out in Bellflower, California, just last night, and have a story up on our website. And he mentioned how the first person he mentioned was Chad Bowden is the person he has the best relationship with at Notre Dame. And the next person he said that he talked to regularly was James Laurinaitis. And now obviously that's not a contact for him. He did mention, like, unprovoked, I didn't have to like pull it out of him, that's the bad sign if you have to ask about a coach specifically. But he mentioned having relationships with Al Washington and Al Golden as well. So I think that Notre Dame needs to sort of make sure that those linebackers still feel valued. Kingston certainly did. It helped that Marcus Freeman came by his school last week to prove that. But yeah, I think Notre Dame needs to make sure that Al Golden is involved with these linebacker recruits and continuing to convince them to come to Notre Dame. Now, maybe the way Notre Dame has it working, it's Marcus Freeman plays such a big role with linebackers as a former linebacker coach and a linebacker himself, that Al Golden isn't needed as much there. But I think it's a little bit troublesome that James Laurinaitis was relied on and needed so much in that department. Now, maybe it was just because he was so good at it. Like, why wouldn't a kid want to talk to James Laurinaitis, a former NFL linebacker, about being a linebacker at Notre Dame? But I think there needs to be some adjustments made now that he's no longer here.
I think that there have been people suggesting, well, why don't they go out and get Manti Te'o? I don't know, with a brand new newborn, and I think his daughter is maybe 1 or 2. I don't know that that's the lifestyle that he's looking for at this point in his career. Tom Zbikowski, somebody they could certainly look at. He was a quality control guy up at Western Michigan last year, helped out a lot with special teams. Tommy played close enough to the ball as a safety that I think he would be somebody that might make some sense there. But again, I don't know that you need the splash big name. I agree with you. If it's somebody that can help you with what you're trying to teach, I don't know that you necessarily need the big name as a graduate assistant. Now, if the NCAA changes the rules like it looked like they were going to a few weeks ago, and they give teams unlimited staffs where analysts can coach on the field, and if they're going to change the recruiting rules and so forth, how many coaches can go out, including grad assistants, then I think this is a different conversation, perhaps. Well, I'll tell you what, this is one of the great things about live YouTube shows is I saw Tyler's lips moving and I didn't hear one word that he said, but I see on the bottom that we have a question from John Murray. Do you think Ryan
That's
Barnes
a throw a flag on me. That's my fault. I muted my microphone to take a drink and I started talking as if you could hear me. Thanks for not talking over me. You did a good job of not doing that. So
Thanks.
I will recite the question, which I did to no one but myself. John Murray asked, do you think Ryan Barnes will get more playing time, or if not, will he enter the transfer portal?
You know, I think if he's going to get more playing time, it would be at safety. I think his days of being able to find playing time at corner are over. He had 2 freshmen hop him on the depth chart, and he's got a pretty good chance another one's going to hop him in the spring, and Christian Gray. But there are openings at safety. You know, Thomas Harper from Oklahoma State is really looked upon more as a package guy, as a nickel defender, a replacement for Tariq Bracy, and then also playing in maybe dime packages as well, but not an every down safety. So Ryan Barnes, if he's going to get that chance, he would do it at safety. And if not, then he's got a decision to make. Does the Notre Dame degree mean more to him, or does playing time mean more to him? And we'll see. He could be one of those people in May that jumps into the second portal window and looks for another school.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of Notre Dame's sophomore cornerbacks have to evaluate where they're at on the roster, where they're at in the depth chart. How can they impact this team, and decide if they can do that, or if they want to choose to go somewhere else. I think that there's a number of positions that are like that, and maybe not necessarily sophomore specifically, but at different positions where there's seemingly a clear pecking order. And if guys can't find a way to make an impact going into this season and see a future for themselves, then there's going to be a number of guys that have to transfer out based on the scholarship numbers. So I think cornerback is a position that could be possible. Now, whether Ryan Barnes is one of them, I can't say that for certain, but I would like to see what he could do as a potential safety. That was something that I think both him and Clarence Lewis, depending on how you feel about your cornerbacks, could potentially take some time in the spring to see if safety is a potential fit for them.
So we've got a lot more on the agenda, and we've passed the 1 hour mark, Tyler. So should we save some of this for next week?
Yeah, let's go ahead and save some for next week. I don't know that anything was particularly pressing that we needed to get to. I wanted to plug your CJ Carr story one more time.
Sure.
I really enjoyed reading that, and I think Notre Dame fans will as well, to get CJ Carr's perspective on Notre Dame and Sam Hartman and recruiting some other guys. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a story for our Inside ND Sports subscribers ranking Notre Dame's assistant coaches and the effort they have put in over the last year, both on the field and off the field as in recruiting and transfer portal guys. So we always have much more content than what we're giving here on YouTube, but we appreciate bringing some of these conversations to you all. Thank you to everyone who tuned in live for Football Never Sleeps, and we appreciate all of you watching this on replay as well. There are even more of you that watch on replay, and we are excited that you guys find us interesting, even if we're not live and you can see us trying to talk with a muted microphone in the very moment. We're going to keep doing these like we talked about at the beginning of the show. We'll do these through spring football. Maybe next week will be Tuesday night. We haven't nailed that down yet, but I think that maybe makes some sense for us. We will let you guys know. We'll have another Inside ND Sports podcast available on Thursday. I'm curious if those who watch our shows here are interested in us posting our podcast audio on YouTube as well. It isn't something we've done previously, but I'm interested to seeing if there is an audience for that. And as always, you can find us on the Inside Lounge message board, hanging out, answering questions, and producing content for InsideNDSports.com. Have a good evening.
And subscribe.
And subscribe.